One question I do ask every single person, and this would be at Buffer or at Shopify, I find really telling, is sort of why did you apply for the role and what made you interested in the company? And I think that can be a very telling question because it shows a lot of motivation as to why the person's applying. It can talk a lot about what they value as a person as well in the role. And it can also give you signals to some of the earlier things I spoke about. Have they done the research on the company?
This is The Anonymous Marketer, a podcast where we tackle the biggest questions from the B2B marketing community. But instead of bringing on guests for a quick chat, every question comes from an anonymous source. These are the questions B2B marketers have, but are afraid to ask. Let's start the conversation.
Hello there and welcome to The Anonymous Marketer. I am your host, Kirsti Lang, and joining me today is my boss, basically. Simon Heaton is the Director of Growth Marketing at Buffer. He's in the virtual studio today, and I'm going to try not to screw this up. I think I'm probably more nervous for this call than I usually am, and I'm always really nervous for these. I'm going to do my best, Simon.
No need to be nervous. Excited to chat, Kirsti.
Yeah, thank you so much for making time for this. I know how busy you are on a daily basis and all of the things that you handle at Buffer. Simon has headed up the marketing team at Buffer with my direct manager, Hayley Griffiths, for going on 2 years now. He's also previously held leadership roles at Shopify, where he led the acquisition program team in Shopify's growth organization as growth lead, or senior growth lead rather, as well as mentoring startup founders who are part of the Singapore-based equity fund and business accelerator, Antler. Simon, you are super, super busy, as I mentioned previously, so I really appreciate you making time for this. It's great to finally have you in the studio. We've been talking about doing this for ages.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's definitely long overdue. I know we've chatted about having this for a few months now, so I'm excited to finally have time and get into it.
Thank you so much. Today, we're going to talk about something that I think this is the most asked question I get via the form at marketersindemand.com/anonymous for the podcast. We're going to be talking about how to get a job at a company like Buffer. So this is the exact question from the listener who sent it in. I'm gonna choose not to see it as antagonistic. I'm sure this is just a really kind question that someone has asked quite genuinely. How did you get hired at Buffer? With all the layoffs in 2023 and 2024, it feels impossible to get a job at a great company as a marketer. We're competing against great people from HubSpot, Google, and more. How do you stand out in a market like this? That is a great question, and there is so much to unpack here. Simon, you have hired for several roles, including mine, in your 2 years at Buffer, and as we record this, you have just finished, or you're finishing up a hiring round for a senior marketing automation manager.
I think the question's really top of mind for probably a lot of people in the industry right now. The question itself talks about there's dynamics that have been shifting in tech especially. There's lots of talent on the market, lots of people looking for jobs, so more competition. So I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about that. I'm really excited to share a bit more about that. I can hop right into a bit about how I personally got started at Buffer, or we can get there eventually. What do you think?
That is one of my questions. I think as we run up to the question, I would love it if you could tell me a little bit more about your career, and how you ended up at Buffer. But before that, where have you been?
Yeah, sure. I've been in marketing now for a bit over a decade. I started my career working in agency, actually. So I was primarily a digital marketing strategist at an integrated marketing agency, and did that for the first few years outside of a university. And then I was fortunate enough to join a company called Shopify, which at the time was based in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and joined them in 2015 as a content marketing manager. And so when I joined that team, I was building the content marketing program and engine for one of their business units. Over time, I ended up building a team to work on that. And I ended up spending about 7 years at Shopify, as you mentioned, doing a variety of roles, which ended up culminating in me leading the acquisition program on the main merchant growth marketing organization. And that was a lot of fun. I worked with some really incredible people, and we got to do some really fun things. But all chapters close, and eventually I found myself looking for a new challenge. And Buffer ended up being one of the companies that I started speaking to. I had some personal connections at Buffer as well. So I had worked with one of our great product managers, Amanda Marachko, previously, and she was telling me all about how incredible the company was. So we really started to chat that way. And met with the team in Joel, and the rest is history that way. And I've been now, like you said, at Buffer for about 2 years and a little bit in that time, primarily leading growth marketing and a lot of cross-functional kind of strategic stuff around the growth area.
And a lot of hiring. I think you've hired, it's 3 or 4 roles since you started, which is already quite a lot in 2 years.
Yeah, and I think when I joined Buffer, we were going through a little bit of a rebirth of marketing, let's call it. As I mentioned, a lot of people during the pandemic, I think, changed jobs or sought out new opportunities. So we had this opportunity when I joined to start bringing in a lot of new folks, yourself included. And yeah, I have been part of quite a few interview rounds, either as the hiring manager myself or as just like a senior interviewer here at Buffer. And yeah, when I was at Shopify, I hired for definitely over a dozen roles that reported to me directly. Wow. And then was involved in many other interviews there as well. Yeah, easy to say. I definitely have some experience looking at this thing and some insight in the process. I'm definitely happy to get into that too.
So I think let's start by talking specifically about the process at Let's start specifically by talking about the process at Buffer. Simon, correct me if I'm wrong, we're a very small team. I've never been involved in the hiring process myself. I think I've only been there eight months, which feels shorter than that. Already. But yeah, 8 months. And I'm not a manager, so I've never hired in any capacity. But the process, as I understand it, is the hiring manager manages things from end to end. We don't really work with recruiters. We don't work with agencies. Can you talk a little bit about how that process goes from start to finish?
Yeah, of course. And as you rightfully mentioned, Buffer's a small team by design, right? We're under 100 people, so relatively small. And we actually don't have a traditional talent acquisition team that you would sometimes see at a larger organization, team that's fully responsible for the managing the pipeline of candidates and guiding them through that process. So at Buffer, and I would imagine a lot of companies similar in size, the hiring manager themselves is the one who's doing a lot of that process. For my roles, that can be me, or it could be, of course, somebody else. And that really requires the hiring manager to be the one to go through all the applications, to look at all the resumes. If you have field questions, which a lot of, at least our job postings do, you're reading through those to get a sense of all the candidates before you even meet them. And I think it can take time, right? A lot of these hiring managers are doing this on top of their regular weekly work schedule. And it does take a lot of time. And I can speak mostly for Buffer, but we pride ourselves on taking the opportunity to really go through every single application. I think the belief is if these individuals have taken the time to put an effort to apply to Buffer, regardless of the volume, the least we can do is make sure that at least we've seen and screened their application. So it does take time. And it's definitely a process, but I also think being able to be involved at that start part of the process as a hiring manager allows you to get a lot of context on the candidates a lot earlier too, compared to maybe if you were working with a talent acquisition team and you brought into it at a later point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pull on the thread that you just mentioned now is the application questions, the questions that you have to fill out when you send through your application with Buffer. It's not just a cover letter. There are a series of quite in-depth questions. And I remember from when I was hired, I think I spent 2 or 3 days going through every question. I had a whole Notion document where I was writing everything out and reworking it, and it was always too long and I'd have to go back and edit it, and I was asking my mom to proofread things for me. So I spent a lot of time, and I know people find these questions quite difficult because it is, an arduous process a lot of the time to apply for a job, and some people will just skip over these or provide a couple of words or use AI. I think I've heard that is happening as well. So when you look at those questions, you really do spend time going through all the answers. Would it be fair to say that they are more telling about a person and how they might fit in at the company than maybe a resume or CV?
Yeah, I think it's a really good take on it, Kirsti. And I would say I'd agree in many ways that not just so I think there's 2 parts of it. There's the effort put into responding to some of those questions. I think some candidates might feel like it's an unnecessary part of the process, or it's just being used to screen out people, which in some cases it can be at other firms that I've worked at. But for Buffer, we've really selected a lot of these questions with a lot of purpose behind them to get a sense of either how the individual might fit and operate within our type of culture and our type of teams, but also to get a sense of the passion that they have for what they do and really get a sense of like how that comes through. One thing I will say, and you mentioned it, is outside of low effort, let's say submissions on some of the questions, I've put in a sentence or two, or we've even gotten some where people don't even want to answer the questions. I'll tell you about it in the interview.
Yes.
That doesn't really work for me, at least. It might work for
And you're
people.
building intrigue, cliffhangers there.
It's a tactic for sure. But what we have seen a lot of too is definitely the increased use of AI to craft responses to these questions. And I am not an anti-AI person. I actually like advocate in our team to use it so we can improve our ability to ship things and be more efficient. But for an application, we're really trying to get a sense of who you are as a person when you're applying, regardless of whether it's Buffer or not. And when you lean on a tool like AI to maybe do it a bit quicker or do your first draft, but you don't change too much for it, you lose a lot of that personality component, I think, that really shines through when you take the time to do it yourself. And I will say, it's even without something like an AI grader, it's painfully obvious after you read an application that has been written by a human and they've taken the time to do it, and then you afterwards see one that was very clearly written by AI, just like the tone and the type of words that are used, it's pretty obvious to tell. So you might, if you have thought about doing it and people listening, you might think you get away with it, but I would definitely try to just put the extra effort in and draft something up yourself so that the true you comes through and like the people on the other end get a sense of who you are.
Yeah, I think especially for marketing roles, right? You're screening these applications as someone who has worked in content, who has been a writer. So I think that is glaringly obvious to you. But yeah, I'm definitely leaning into AI at the moment. Simon, you'll be very proud to hear that I did an article outline with AI this morning, just in fact, and it was really helpful. But yeah, I think it could be a good springboard for ideas or maybe give you some sparks, what you want to talk about. But yeah, I would definitely edit those until they are completely your own and not AI at all. Sorry, I took us off on a tangent there. Coming back to the process at Buffer. So once you have screened all of these applications, where do you go from there?
Yeah, so I would say the typical process after we've screened was generally you have your short list of candidates that you feel could be pretty relevant for the job based on their resume, their experience, their cultural fit. I would say most jobs, at least at Buffer, follow pretty similar structure for the interview process. Initially, you'll generally meet with the hiring manager themselves. So this will give the hiring manager the opportunity to assess your role fit and team fit further than what they can assess in the application. In many cases, they'll be building on questions that were maybe in the application, going deeper into how you would do sort of questions like how would you approach this problem, what would you do in this situation, to just get an assessment of like how you would work day to day and how you would work with the team. And that's generally the first step. From there, what we've started to realize is really helpful for us is a case or technical exercise component to the interview process where candidates will, very specific to the role they're applying for, but will take home an exercise and complete it and either walk us through it or submit it, and we'll review depending on the nature of the exercise. This particular step is, I would say, one of the most important ones that we found, especially at Buffer. A lot of people can talk the talk, but not everybody can walk the walk. And I think when you do the technical or case exercises, you're able to actually see some of that work output manifest. And it can really, we've had a lot of twists and turns in our processes. If we would think someone was really great after we spoke to them, but then the work maybe didn't meet up to that expectation or vice versa. So it's become a really important part of the process overall, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then from there, it's pretty standard. We generally have a secondary team interview with somebody from, let's say you're hiring for marketing. You have, let's say Haley, the counterpart lead in our team would probably be part of that process. And this is maybe unique to Buffer, but all interview rounds end with an interview with Joel, our founder and CEO, which I think is a really special step. Some people get a little nervous at this stage.
I was terrified. I don't think I've ever been more nervous in my entire life than during that interview, but it actually ended up being lovely. It was on my birthday, which was just, I don't know, it was like the best birthday present ever. But anyway, yes, Joel, he is very intimidating, but not actually.
Yeah, I think it feels intimidating to meet with more senior people in the process, but our founder and CEO, he's a really great guy. So I think people realize they meet with him. He's not too intimidating or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I would say that's the general process for most of the roles at Buffer. I'm happy to go any deeper on any of that or anything like that.
This is something I would love to touch on actually, which I didn't think of going into this, was the exercise. And I've seen some chatter about how much, this comes back to what I touched on with the application questions and how much effort should you be putting into these processes, how much can companies ask you for? And it's a contentious issue. I'd love to hear your take on that. Sorry, that's a very difficult question. We can cut this if it doesn't feel good. But
I'll give my best shot, but I definitely understand what you're saying. I think in different disciplines too, there's a lot of opposition to these types of exercises. It's like free work.
Yes,
I think especially with more creative roles, or if you're coming from like a consultancy background, like that's definitely how it feels. And I totally get that. I think if you put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes or the company's shoes, especially a company like Buffer, who's very small, every person on the team is really important. And the process takes a lot of effort. We want to be 120% sure when we make that offer. And that's not just to benefit Buffer and our end, but also the team member. We want to make sure we're bringing in people who can actually be truly successful at Buffer, and it's not a mistake or a challenge on either end. So for us, it is really important. And I think when you are asked for something like a case or a technical exercise, trying to think through maybe like why they're asking for that before being like, maybe I don't want to do this is a good thing, I'd say. What we do at Buffer to try to bridge those feelings a little bit is we generally use artificial cases or just very hypothetical, obscure kind of asks that aren't actually related to the work itself that we're doing or active projects, so that there's no worry of, okay, I do this work, I share all my great ideas, I don't get the job, and they just take my ideas and apply them. And so generally what we do is we'll give a case or a technical study exercise, that is grounded in nothing close to reality for what we're doing. So I know, for example, when we hired our marketing UX designer, we had them design landing pages for a program that we would never do. It was something like we were collaborating with hotels and we would send users to hotel. I don't know. It was just super theoretical, just to see how you can like apply yourself to a problem space. But we try to make it fair in that it's not like we're going to take all your work and apply it. And that's how we do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to add something here from the candidate's perspective as well.
Sure.
In that when I was looking for a new role, I was applying for every job that kind of reasonably I thought I would be a good fit for. And when you cast the net that wide, it is so much work when everyone's asking for exercises and there are interviews and questions you have to fill out. But I found that instead of and I had my Notion and I was copying and pasting things and tweaking them here and there, but I reached a point where I was like, this is not sustainable. I can't keep doing this. It's exhausting. I need to really be laser focused about the roles that I really want and put in the effort that the company asks for, because it's an employer's market right now. And I think once I did that, obviously the lift was much lower. I was able to spend more time and effort and energy, and I had that kind of creative energy to spend on the assignments and whatnot for the companies that I really did want to work at. And I think I went from applying for hundreds of jobs to, I think it was 3 in the end that I really focused on, and Buffer was one of those. I know it's really difficult, like having been in that position, it's seeing it as free work, but if you look at it from that lens, I don't know if that might be helpful to the person who asked our question for the show today. Okay, so back to the hiring manager's perspective, Simon. At Shopify, did things work a little bit differently? I didn't say Spotify this time, I said Shopify.
Yep.
I'm doing such a great job tonight. Okay, do over. At Shopify, did you find that things were quite similar at such a large organization? How did the process work there, if you're able to share?
Been at Shopify, so anyone listening, these processes may have changed for the company, but I do think that some of these probably apply to larger organizations. So Shopify, being a company that has more than 10,000 employees, obviously has very different processes than a company like Buffer that has about 75, as you can imagine.
That is crazy.
At Shopify, from about 800 people up until the 10,000 number I just mentioned. So the processes changed and evolved as the company scaled. But what I will say is one of the biggest differences is the presence of a talent acquisition team. And so Shopify, most large organizations have a team that's specifically focused on hiring, recruiting, and managing the candidate process as they're applying and interviewing. And so for us as hiring managers at a big company, the actual first touch point we have with them is well after they've applied. The actual talent acquisition coordinators or managers will be the one screening applications to see if they're the right fit, which they've aligned with the hiring manager on to know what sort of skills we're looking for, what sort of experience type of person are we looking for. But what they would actually do is they would actually conduct the very first interview as well. So I actually wouldn't meet the candidates face to face until their second interview with Shopify, which is really interesting. And I don't know if they still call it this, but at least when I was there, the first interview was called the life story. At least will be referred to it internally. And so the whole thing, the concept was about learning about a candidate's life story up until this point and having them talk through that. It felt very, especially when I first applied to Shopify, it was very unconventional to walk into the first interview room and interview and have the first question be, what were you like in high school? And
I'm glad I didn't have to answer that.
Yeah, and it's a strange process, but it was by design as well. I think the life story interview is really looking to get a sense of the cultural fit for the candidates at the company. And companies, especially in tech culture, is such an important part of the productivity of a company and how everybody works together in collaboration. And in these interviews, well, they're asking you to talk about experiences in university and up until this point and all these things, stuff about your family. They're really assessing signals for how well you'll operate in our culture. They look for things like examples of ownership in your past experiences and drive to take on things. They're looking for humility in how you talk about things that have happened to you over your life, how you collaborate and work with others. And it was a really interesting process. And I found by having that, because we get a lot of volume of applications at Buffer, but at a large organization, it is also a lot more, let's call it. So these really helped whittle down a very large applicant pool to people that when I was meeting them, I felt very confident that they passed the cultural check. They would do well at Shopify. They would do well in the team. And I could then really focus my efforts on getting deeper into the role and the craft experience with them and go on that way. And I would say the rest of the process is actually quite similar to Buffer in like the subsequent interviews and cases and all of that. But it was really this first part that is really different, I would say, when you're looking at a larger organization.
Yeah, that's such a cool approach. I love that because it's so much easier for me, at least personally. I find it a lot easier to talk about my life and my family and my interests. And when you come in and you're like, this is my work and these are the things that I do and these are my skills and my achievements, and it can feel a bit gross. So it's quite nice to sit down with someone and just have a conversation like a human and set you at ease maybe for the rest of the process. So that's really interesting to know.
That as well, and that being able to start talking about what's probably everyone's most comfortable and familiar topic themselves really does make you feel a lot more comfortable because the interviewers did great jobs of genuinely wanting to learn more about who you were and stuff.
Okay, that is fascinating. I love that. Back to a process where I'm sure probably a lot of hiring managers don't have, I want to say the luxury, for want of a better word, of having this pre-screenings done for them. So looking at CVs and resumes and application questions. When you are going through these, what are some things that stand out to you as part of these application kind of packets that you get?
Yeah, for sure. I would say at least lately, I'm definitely more focused on the quality of what's inside the application. So quantity of written examples is not definitely what I'm looking for. And I think there was a time where people were doing what they could to actually make the resume stand out, really visually, augment the resume to something. Yeah, exactly. I just gleam over that stuff personally, but I think for certain roles, it could be useful. The things I do really look for, I would say there's on the application level, probably 2 or 3 things. One is, I'd say, research. I like to see that individuals who applied have taken the time to thoughtfully respond to each question and to do so in a way that creates relevancy to what we're trying to do at Buffer. I think that far too often, and this maybe applies for the interview as well, is far too often people will come into the process and they know, let's say, the very surface level details about what the company does or what the current craft that they're applying for looks like today. What I would say really impresses me in this area is when someone's taking the time. For example, we're hiring for an automation manager to own, let's say, email and a bunch of things. They've taken the time to sign up for our emails, and they know what our onboarding looks like, and they've taken the time to engage with our blog newsletters so that they come with that sense of context and ideally some input to share based on their experience. So I think taking the time to just familiarize yourself with the brand you're applying for, the culture of it, the product, the space, how they're doing, if that information is available, is super important and can often be overlooked. I would say beyond that, of course, experience is a super important. The relevant experience for the role and the business. When I say business, in that different businesses require different things of a marketer. Let's say an organization like Shopify, where, the growth marketing org that I was part of was probably 300 people. Each person has a very specialized role that they're focused on. We have multiple people doing SEO, let's say. And so being a specialist and being able to illustrate that at a big company is really valuable. But a company like Buffer, where it's a little bit smaller, we really value people who, of course, have that expertise, but have these wings or this ability to adapt and work in different areas as required, because we do act like a small business or a startup. So I think that organizational complexity and understanding how that experience fits in is important. And I would also argue, just outside of the organizational experience, it's the experience for the role itself that we want to see is there. And even if they're coming from, let's say, an agency to tech or a big company to a small company, as long as they're able to show how they could adapt that thinking to an applied area in the new context, that's all that matters. You've only worked at big companies, you're not going to succeed here. If that was the case, then I wouldn't have been at Buffer, for example. But it's more, can you demonstrate that you're able to take those learnings and the processes and the work that you did at the larger, more, let's say, complex and mature organization, and apply that in a way effectively in a different context.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's something that I understood intrinsically. Yes, I've worked at a small company, so I can bring these skills, but I think making sure that you understand, as you said, the organizational complexity and all of the layers involved. I think companies these days are really good at having their company pages up to date as well. So that's a really easy one to go through ahead of applying or ahead of the application process, just to get a sense of how big the organization, how small, how much you'll be expected to take on as a marketer. I think a lot of folks have experience as a marketing generalists, but maybe have gone on to specialize. I think it might be useful if you're applying at a smaller company, that you can say, yes, I do still have these skills. I can still apply them elsewhere, even though I'm specialized in SEO or growth marketing, or whatever the case is. That is a hot tip. Simon, you have already touched on this, but when it comes to the interviews, I was going to ask you what level of preparation that you've seen in candidates that has impressed you, but you've really answered that already. I think that kind of a good base of knowledge about the company is very important when you're in these competitive hiring processes.
Yeah, and just illustrating that you've taken a step further to use the product, familiarize yourself with the area that you're applying for, I think really goes a long way, not just for you to be able to then bring either relevant or less relevant experience and apply contextually to the new environment, but also because you're able to then show that you care. And I think that's something that is really important for especially companies like Buffer, where every person we bring on really matters. Is we want to bring people on who aren't just a fit for the role, but are a fit for the team. And for us, that's a lot of having that sort of extra grit or perseverance to go a bit further. It was interesting because I was having a mastermind yesterday with my mastermind at Buffer, Jenny, who is our director of finance, and she's also hiring right now. And we were talking about how we have been assessing candidates and thinking about this process. And one thing that came up for us while we were chatting about it was this concept of team fit. So I think there's this, everyone thinks about organizational fit and cultural fit. Are they going to work in the culture of Buffer or the culture of Shopify? But there's a really important factor, I think, that falls to hiring managers to assess, will this individual fit within the immediate team? Or even more plainly, would I enjoy working with this person? And talking with them every day? Because I think in a small team like ours, it's super collaborative. We're often working and chatting on a daily basis. And it's a tough one because you don't want to introduce a sense of bias. And both of us went back and forth about this a little bit. But I do think that every team is extremely unique in terms of their dynamics and their composition and the different personalities that are part of it, which influences how the team works. And I think that being very careful about making sure we're introducing the right people into that mix, which doesn't mean a homogenous team by any means as well.
Yes,
it means,
absolutely.
Will this person jive well and work well with the others that we already have here? And it's a really, nebulous part of the process. And it's, I think, just
Yeah.
my recommendation to people applying is just to be yourself, try to be authentic, genuine, is the best way to come forward. I think a lot of people worry about posturing a little bit in interviews and
Yeah.
things like that. And I think really to get a sense of this, hiring managers like to see the authentic you.
Yeah. And I think that like level of posturing or kind of having the things that you need to talk through, and sometimes that I felt a little bit in my hiring process that I over prepared. So I had all these things that talking
Sure.
points that I wanted to go through. And when I didn't get to them, I would get anxious, and then I would try and make terrible segues to talk about the things that I thought were important, for what it's worth. But I think sometimes you get in your own way when it comes to the cultural team or company fit. You put up those barriers and you aren't authentically yourself. And that level of when you gel with a person, when you just have a great chat, you connect about work and about goals and where you want to be in your career. And I think that, yeah, that comes with, it's so difficult to say this on, it's so easy to say this on the other side of the hiring process, but I wish I'd been a little bit more relaxed and less kind of laser focused on all the things that I wanted to say about myself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people probably feel that way. I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think as hiring managers, we can also recognize if people are feeling nervous and they're just getting comfortable in the process. And I think that's very natural. I think it's a great recommendation to come with points that you want to highlight relevant to your experience, it's relevant to the new role, and try to deliver on those throughout the interview. I am the kind of person where I love getting the question, can I clarify more for you, or can I tell you more about myself? So I have the opportunity to go deeper. Or if people just want to say, oh yeah, I'd love to just add a couple things to that last question, that's awesome too, because you do really have that one, 30-minute to an hour window at the start of the process to make a good impression and to build confidence and stuff in your ability. And I would say just go for it. Try not to overthink it. And it's okay if you're nervous.
Yeah. No, I think also being nervous like really shows that you care as well. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah, something to remember. You really raised a great point there about just saying, hey, I have these things that I want to tell you. Maybe instead of trying to naturally weave them into conversation subtly as I was doing and probably failing dismally. But I think that's such a great tip, just to say, hey, there's some things I'd like to tell you about myself that I think are relevant. Can I just talk you through them? Obviously don't have a 1,200 page document, but I think it is, you've got your shots and you need to take it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Simon, what is your favorite interview question to ask?
Wow, that's a really good one. I'd say most of the questions I ask differ depending on the role and the craft that I'm hiring for. So I don't hire often for general marketers. I usually hire for someone a little more specialized. But one question I do ask every single person, and this would be at Buffer or at Shopify, I find really telling, is sort of why did you apply for the role and what made you interested in the company? And I think that can be a very telling question because it shows a lot of motivation as to why the person's applying. It can talk a lot about what they value as a person as well in the role. And it can also give you signals to some of the earlier things I spoke about. Have they done the research on the company? Are they coming prepared enough to speak about things that might align to our cultural values or what we're looking for? And I think it's one of those questions that you can ask any role, any level of seniority, and it's very leveling in that way. And so I think it's a very useful one to use. And I usually start off every interview I do with that question.
Yeah, that is a great one and such a good one to prepare for as well, because it is, as you say, so universal. It doesn't matter which role you're applying for. You've raised something that I had forgotten that I wanted to talk about. But I think, how would you, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this that doesn't come across awful. How would you react if someone answers that question? So Buffer, and this is helpful context for folks that might not have heard of the company, does have a really strong company culture. We hire globally, we're completely remote, and it's an incredible place to work. And I think people will often highlight that as, why did you apply for this job? I want to work at Buffer because I want to work remotely. I want to get the free books benefits. I think when you say, I want to work at company X because I've seen you have great benefits, tell me what that makes you think as a hiring manager.
Yeah, and it's a really great question, Kirsti. I think, unfortunately, a lot of candidates slip up here in that they speak to the culture of the company being what attracts them, but then they list off perks and benefits that
Yes.
the company might offer. And I think the big thing is to the company and to the leaders in the company, the culture is not those things. It's not the you can work from anywhere. It's not the ping pong table in the office or
Yes.
catered lunches or whatever it could be, whatever company you're at. Those things are perks and they're benefits and they're great, but they shouldn't be the reason why you want to work at the company, and they definitely aren't going to be the reason why the hiring manager feels confident in like your reason to join the company either. I've had all versions of that answer, from the perks to, oh, my friends work here and I think it would be cool, to a lot of things like that. What I would recommend in the situation where you are trying to signal to a hiring manager that you're interested in the culture is try to take that a level higher in terms of the culture and think of it more as almost like a tactics and strategy dichotomy. If we're going back to marketing stuff, the tactics are the perk, but what is actually the cultural strategy that we're trying to do? And for something like Buffer, there's focuses on things like transparency and flexibility and working in a way that is different but effective. And I think candidates who come in and highlight those elements of the culture, who highlight, I'm interested in a company like Buffer because of its commitment to transparency, and transparency is important to me because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a much stronger response than I want to come work for Buffer because I can get free books. I would say generally if I hear those perk responses, it definitely sets the tone a little bit for the interview as well, and that I'm already questioning if there's the cultural fits there. But I would recommend, even if you do feel that way about like the perks and stuff, which is like, of course we do, that perks exist, is to speak to more of the cultural values and how the way of working and all of that is relevant to you.
That is such a great answer. Thank you. I expected you to say, yeah, maybe don't do that. That's not a great idea. But I love the way that you flipped that around and made that really actionable. Brilliant. Simon, if you could talk to the person who had sent in this question, it sounds like they are at their wits' end. They're looking for a job. If you could talk to them and give them some advice, what would you say to them?
Yeah. First off, I would say, just because it's mentioned in the question, is like, I wouldn't go into the process worrying about the competition. I think, yes, the market is a hiring market right now. There's a lot of candidates from layoffs and changes in tech, but there's always going to be other candidates. There's always going to be more experienced candidates on the market. And just because you haven't worked for a big brand name or you haven't worked at a FANG company, it doesn't mean that you can't succeed against them at the right opportunity. And so first, right out the gate, I would say if you're already going into it feeling like that, it's understandable, but try to remove that comparative from your mind and just really focus on what's in your control. It's very stoic of me, I would say. And then what I would say is that the reality is true, though. There is a lot of competition on the market. What I could recommend is perseverance and grit is super important in times like this. Applying to job as a full-time job. It takes a lot of effort, like you mentioned earlier. It takes a lot of time and energy, and it can be tiring and draining if you keep getting rejections or no callbacks. I think being able to persevere through that and just keep pushing is really important, just because you never know when the right opportunity is going to arise. And I'll say that even for my career, I never knew. There's lots of jobs I've applied for. I didn't get called back. I didn't make it through certain interviews. I made it to the final interview and didn't get the job. But I do think that the job that you do take, or the one that's right for you, is out there a little bit. A few other more maybe like tactic type tips I would say that's helped me at least is building and maintaining a strong network of professional peers has been very critical, I'd say, in my journey. I mentioned my old colleague Amanda, who's also now my colleague at Buffer, was one of the reasons why that started that conversation there. And I think a lot of these opportunities do come that way, from peers that you've either made strong impressions on at work or you've worked with previously, and there's a lot of trust there. And I think some people underestimate that while you're working somewhere, everyone you're working with can be part of that future network for you. There is a time where they probably won't work there, and maybe they're building a team somewhere else, and they're going to remember the great work that you did or how awesome you were to work with, for example. And so those doors open when that happens. And when we have that level of established trust, it just makes it easier for the hiring manager to feel confident that this person is right for the job. And so maintaining that, building it, reaching out to the network can be a really, really valuable way to do it, especially if you're trying to find a certain in for a particular company. If you know someone there, that's a really great way to start that process. And then I would say if this individual, let's say, I guess it's different if you're currently in a job and you're looking for a job, or if you're out of work and you're looking for a job, or if you're trying to break into marketing or the tech industry. So I would say it's a little different in each situation. If for this individual, I'm going to make the assumption that perhaps they're, feet on the ground, they're throwing out the resumes, they're not working right now. I would say that the biggest thing is just to not sit idle. I think that even if you're unsuccessful in getting that work, there's lots of opportunities for you to continue to hone your craft and to build on your experience professionally that isn't tied to a job, let's say, a business. You could start a side project, build a personal website, blog, something like that. Yeah, you have an amazing podcast like this one, or even post on LinkedIn. And we're doing a lot of that internally right now at Buffer as a marketing team, trying to build our own presence there. And I think just investing in yourself this way, investing in building your experience while you're not technically on the clock can be super valuable to just fill that gap of time, let's say, that you have, but also to make sure you're still, moving your own skills forward. And then I would say for anyone listening who's trying to break into tech through marketing from, let's say, consultancy or from e-commerce or some other type of industry, I would just say try to get that initial experience in tech where you can. I wouldn't expect, especially with the state of the market today, that most, let's say, FAANG companies or really large tech corporations are as eager as they once were to hire on potential. I think that was a thing that was pretty prominent in the last decade. But I would say now, but there's a lot of people on the market, lots of engineers, marketers who have experience that these bigger companies gravitate towards. I had a friend trying to break into tech, and what I recommended to him was just start small, try to just build that experience at a startup or something more local. And as you start to build experience in tech, you start to expose yourself to the problems and the way of marketing, which I'd say is different than in other organizations. Then you're just going to bolster your opportunity to get something maybe at one of those bigger companies you're trying to strive towards eventually. But the baby steps, or like the stepping stone approach along the way, I think is just really important to think about.
I love that. Simon, thank you. I can think of nothing else to add there. I think that is a great note to end on. To our anonymous marketer, if you are still on the hunt, hopefully by the time that this comes out, you have found something. But thank you so much for submitting this question. We are sending you so much luck. I know it's tough out there. I have been where you are. And I hope you find something brilliant soon. If you are a marketer and would like to submit a question for the show, you can head over to marketersindemand.com/anonymous, and I will bring on an expert like Simon to answer your question. Simon, thank you so much for making time for this today. It's been fantastic to chat. You've given me so much to think about. I am overanalyzing my hiring process now and thinking back shamefaced to all of the mistakes I made, but I'm really glad to have ended up where I am. Yeah. If I can do it, then you can do it.
Yeah, you're too modest, Kirsti, but yes, thank you for having me. And hopefully anyone listening that this was helpful. And if you ever are looking to expand your network and chat about getting into marketing, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely. That is something that I should have added. Simon is on LinkedIn. He's sharing fascinating stuff about the inner workings of the growth marketing team, about Buffer, about how we use AI. Yeah, so I definitely recommend giving him a follow. I will put the link in the show notes. And that is everything. Thanks, marketers.
Thanks for checking out this episode of The Anonymous Marketer. This show is part of Marketers in Demand, a network of podcasts featuring the world's leading B2B marketers. Unlock your full potential as a B2B marketer by going to marketersindemand.com.